I started the show almost 7 years ago when the coalition government tripled tuition fees because I wanted to give away my philosophy degree for free. At time of recording, the show has just over 800,000 subscribers. None of them are seeing patients within the required 18-week limit, and waiting lists are extremely long. How long, you ask? Well, at time of recording, the largest clinic in London has 11,407 patients on its waiting list. Last month, they offered first appointments to 50. I tell you this story to introduce the data flattening problem. That process is how AIs like ChatGPT and DALL-E Mini work. They scrape the internet for data. No consent is taken, no care or thought is given. The people who make these models assume that they can do that because it's just data, just abstract and immaterial, and that's not true. Training data is made by and from people. You might be aware that in the United States, the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors Guild have been on strike. At time of recording, the WGA might have reached a provisional agreement with the studios in the last 3 hours, but we don't know the content of it yet. Part of what they're striking about is AI, because text and image generators obviously pose a threat to artists' livelihoods. Decriminalizing testosterone might also help. A lot of people do have to resort to self-medication when the NHS fails them, so a harm reduction approach would probably do a lot of good there. That's not something the NHS could do on their own. It would require political pressure to bring about. My dad suggested that I write to my MP about all this, so at time of recording, I have sent my MP 19 emails, 12 phone calls, and 1 handwritten letter, all of which she has completely ignored. The entrapment defense fails almost every time, as indeed it failed in United States v. Cromartie when all 4 defendants were found guilty and sentenced to 25 years each in an American gulag, which at the time of recording I believe they are still serving. The NHS is currently being sued by 4 trans people though. That's why Chaplain Tapman was ordered to drop my case. His superiors say he can't do anything that might affect the outcome. At time of recording, the case is scheduled to be heard any day now, and it could have major ramifications. Because you need to not know. And that's where things get interesting. For instance, I am not, at time of recording, a vegetarian. Maybe I will be someday. I have tried a few times, and if I'm honest, it made me pretty miserable. I actually asked Colonel Cathcart point blank, who's looking into these cases? When are you awarding damages? When's the public apology coming? Who is going to resign over these failures, Colonel? And he hasn't said anything. At time of recording. Stated goal of austerity was to reduce the government's budget deficit. It failed to do that, and seems to have resulted in somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 deaths, which seem to have been concentrated in the most deprived areas of the country. Many of these cuts are still in effect today, and the politicians responsible have faced no consequences. At time of recording. Read a conservative British philosopher named Roger Scruton. I think Scruton is worth knowing, especially now and especially if you're British. In the UK, the Conservative Party have been in power for the last 13 years, and next year we have a general election. At time of recording, a lot of people are predicting the Conservatives will lose, so the big question is, what will they become once they're out? When I listen to young Conservatives and senior Conservatives trying to preempt this change, a lot of what they say sounds like Roger Scruton. Before the show begins, I'd like to say that at no point during tonight's play am I going to criticize Amy Coney Barrett for being religious, for being anti-feminist, or even for being conservative. On the contrary, I'm going to try and be as neutral as I possibly can and explore her ideas on their own merits. I think she poses interesting questions, not just for Americans, but for everybody. At time of recording, Barrett has just been confirmed as a Supreme Court Justice in the United States of America, but sharp-eared listeners will glean from my accent and general vibe of cultural arrogance that I am British, and America is not Britain. We've come to accept that now.
Before we start though, one quick announcement. Something quite exciting has happened with the channel, and at time of recording I'm not allowed to tell you about it, which is frustrating because by the time this episode comes out I think I would be allowed to, but I'm not sure. But next week there might be some extra videos / video, or maybe in the weeks after. Next week there'll be a normal video at the usual time on Friday, but there might also be some extra stuff happening. In my country, the UK, we have free healthcare at time of recording, unless you're one of the several million people for whom it isn't actually free. In 2016, the UK voted to leave the European Union by a narrow margin. At time of recording, if we don't reach a deal with the EU or do something to stop Brexit, which could be a second referendum or a general election or just cancel the whole thing, then we will crash out with no deal on the 29th of March at 11 p.m. Today's date of recording is the 27th of February, and I believe at the moment the plan is to turn off all the lights in the country and pretend that we're not in. Loot boxes aren't currently regulated like gambling because you don't play with real money. You buy an in-game virtual currency like V-Bucks or gold or donuts, and you play with that. And because you can't convert that virtual currency back into legal tender, it isn't technically gambling at time of recording, depending on where you are. So, roughly 26.6% of people in the UK get to decide what happens to all the rest. This is an especially acute problem for the people of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Scotland voted Remain majority in every single council, but because Scotland is still part of the UK, at time of recording, and exclusion that trans people face wouldn't be justified either way. And I don't want to paint an overly civilized picture of the transphobic position here. Frequently they do not pose their arguments in polite, academic, good faith terms. Just to remain within the City of London and within recent memory, in July of this year, there was an incident where a bunch of transphobes forced their way to the front of the Pride Parade in order to distribute transphobic leaflets to the public. There's an ongoing campaign at time of recording to try and get the City of London Corporation to ban trans people from certain public spaces. There's been fighting in Hyde Park. A bunch of transphobes are putting up transphobic stickers around the place to try and make trans women in particular feel unwelcome, and also make your dad feel like maybe he doesn't have to get rid of that spore after all. This is not Bertrand Russell and Ludwig Wittgenstein knocking back pints on the banks of the river in Cambridge and talking about philosophy, right? This is street philosophy, and it gets dirty because it's life and death. The Analects was put together decades or possibly centuries after Confucius died, allegedly by his disciples. There are later books attributed to him, or in which he appears as a character, but as far as we know, we don't have anything written by the man himself. At time of recording. I say at time of recording because one of the awesome things about ancient philosophy is we could find a Zhou dynasty tomb tomorrow with some scrolls in it that totally revolutionizes everything we think we know about Confucius. The whole field can and does change overnight. Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton presented very different visions of what the Democratic Party would offer voters in the coming US presidential elections. And at time of recording, it looks like Hillary's going to get the nomination. I have done a video on abortion before, so I won't get into that topic today, but a lot of the media coverage about her appointment is treating it as a sign about the future of reproductive healthcare in the US. Barrett is a devout Catholic. She does believe that abortion is wrong. She has publicly stated that Roe v. Wade was decided incorrectly. Certainly a lot of right-wing people are very keen on the idea that she might help them ban abortion, and it is true that a lot of her previous rulings skew conservative. The vital question for millions of Americans, that I'm afraid at time of recording I can't answer, is will those precedents stand? Many of us now know what some experts warned at the time, that austerity was harmful and ultimately pointless, but many of the policies are still in place, and many of the people who designed and implemented them are walking around freely at time of recording. At time of filming, the results of the USA presidential election are not in, so whilst I wait to find out what colour I should paint my doomsday bunker, and at time of recording, 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 at time of recording. At time of recording, at time of recording, time of recording, at 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 time of recording.